This is Europe, and this is Romania. It's snuggled cozily twixt Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, and the Black Sea. Romania is at the nexus of three unique geocultural regions, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and the Balkans. Um, this actually is important. It plays into kind of everything about Romania. Let's start with the Dacians. This group of people, called the Dacians, lived there since at least 440 BCE, probably longer. Then, in 106 AD, came Emperor Trajan and the Romans. He discovered the land had pretty rich gold and silver deposits, and so started an intense colonization, and that led to the Romanization of the Dacians. The problem with the location, see, I already came back to that, is that it's pretty tricky to defend. There's lots of places for enemies to attack you from. So the Romans retreat from the territory in 271 AD and leave Dacia to the Goths, and later come the Huns, and a whole bunch of others. Long story short, the Romanian area is a non-stop slugfest until 1945 or so. During the Middle Ages, three main regions begin to crystallize: Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania. Or Transylvania, let's use that. Around the 11th century, Transylvania answers to Hungary, and Hungary opens it up to Saxon settlement, and it really stays that way for quite some time. Meanwhile, around the 14th century, Wallachia and Moldavia are trying to fend off the Ottomans, and gives rise to national heroes like Vlad Tepes, who's Vlad the Impaler, the guy who Dracula is based off of, and Stefan cel Mare, Stephen the Great, who's later dubbed the Defender of Christianity, but doesn't last. It's a small country against the Ottoman Empire. So by the 15th century, they're firmly under Ottoman rule. But Wallachia and Moldavia did buy themselves some internal autonomy. The Ottomans must have learned that it really isn't worth it to try and rule Romanians directly. It's just enough to collect tributes and leave them alone, which is something that Romanians are generally pretty proud of. In 1600, the three kingdoms, again, Wallachia, Moldavia, and Transylvania, unite for the first time under Mihail Viteazu, or Michael the Brave. This is the first glimpse of what would become, for all intents and purposes, modern Romania. But this, like most things, doesn't really last for them. By the 18th century, they're firmly back where they were in Transylvania's with the Austrian Empire. They actually got some extra parts of Wallachia and Moldavia there, and the other two kingdoms were reabsorbed by the Ottoman Empire. And this generally wasn't a great time to be a Romanian. Second-class, third-class citizens, whatever you want to call them, they did not have a good time in this period of history. And also, they kind of became obsessed with re-achieving the unity of 1600, with re-achieving that unity of all the people who share the same cultural heritage under the same kingdom or nation. So they tried to reunite the three kingdoms again during the revolutions of 1848. Failed again. Wallachia and Moldavia returned to their relative autonomy under the Ottomans. Transylvania remains under the Austro-Hungarian control. They eventually enlist the help of the Russian Empire to throw off Ottoman control. Of course, they had to give up some land. Them's the breaks, I guess. Wallachia and Transylvania become the Kingdom of Romania, the first independent national state in Eastern Europe, and this happens around the end of the 19th century. Then World War I hits and changes everything, as it usually does. They try neutrality, doesn't really last. Eventually they enter the Entente, as the Entente promises to return Transylvania to the Kingdom of Romania should they win, and that kind of whets their appetite. Unfortunately, joining the Entente doesn't work well for them. They get the crap kicked out of them. However, by the end of the war, both the Austro-Hungarian empires and the Russian empires are pretty much dissolved. So Hungary said, screw it, and relinquishes claim to Transylvania, and Romania, again, is whole. This Greater Romania, or Romania Mare, lasts from 1914 to 1940, basically the period between the wars, the interbellum, is that an English word? Anyway, there's peace outside, but there's still a bunch of internal struggles. The Romanians ditch the monarchy for straight-up dictatorships, And also there's some interesting role reversals between Romanians, who used to be the lower class, the second class, and the Germans and Hungarians, who used to be the more chosen and elect, but now aren't. So there's some interesting things happening there in Transylvania. Then World War II hits, internal struggles, interrupted by that, and they again try neutrality. Again, it doesn't last, but they really try and stick to it. The Soviet Union threatens, Romania appeases and retreats, and so it loses a couple areas, Bessarabia and Bukovina. The Soviet Union keeps pushing, and so Romania, in order to defend itself, joins the Axis. Of course, the Axis, to appease its existing constituents, we'll say, takes some slices of Romania as well, and so it loses some of northern Transylvania and Dobroja in the south. And Romania has some really great oil supplies, so it becomes Germany's biggest oil supplier. And with that distinction, of course, it becomes a prime target for Allied bombing. The city of Ploiești specifically did not fare well. Eventually, Romania defects to the Allies, and this has a double edge of putting them on the winning side eventually, but also having them welcome back into the oh-so-loving arms of the Soviet Union that they just fought a couple years ago. By the end of the war, most of the lost territories are restored, the northern Transylvania, Dobroja, Bessarabia, or rather Bukovina, but they never get Bessarabia back. That becomes part of Ukraine. Some of it eventually becomes the Republic of Moldova. From here on out, the map stays pretty much the same, but there's some violent changes from within. Obviously, they suffered under Soviet control. Citizens were forced to move to cities from their homes in the villages. The beauty of Little Paris, which is what Bucharest was starting to be known as at the beginning of the 1900s, that beauty is bulldozed in order to make way for, we'll say, more efficient concrete blocks. And there's secret police, poverty, false equality. You know the picture. Around 1965, this man Nicolae Ceausescu comes into power, and he starts distancing Romania from Soviet influence, which is great, but it's another two-edged sword for Romania. Ceausescu gets the nation severely into debt and tries to compensate by impoverishing the people, expanding the police state beyond the scope of even the Soviet Union, which is saying something, and all the while spending obscene amounts of money, I mean, even by modern standards, to satisfy his growing ego. Ceausescu is generally recognized as one of the worst dictators of all time. Then in 1989, there's the Glorious Revolution, as it's called, which overthrows Ceausescu, introduces self-governance into Romania, which is a pretty big deal, but it's definitely not a golden bullet. The first set of elections, for example, were we'll say rigged. Long story short, it takes a while for people to actually start electing who they want, and arguably some people would say, even currently, that still hasn't completely happened. So the past 20 years have been a period of transition and an expansion of national psyche for the Romanian people, learning how to be free, how to self-govern, in the larger sense and in the more microcosmic sense too. The majority of citizens are still scarred by communism. Remember, only 8 or 9 years ago, we had the first Romanians entering adulthood who can't remember communism.